Pretty cringe, bro. Greetings, adventurers, and welcome back to the Den of the Drake. Other dragons hoard gold, while I hoard internet cringe. If your party has ever adopted a pet only for it to die horribly in the very next session, go ahead and hit like and subscribe. To honor their sacrifice, of course. This is a shocking revelation, but some people who play Dungeons & Dragons are actually active in the dating scene. I'll go ahead and let you spit out your drink real quick. You done? Okay. Of course, as all loving couples do, they're gonna want to share new things with each other. Which is lovely until your buddy brings some Tinderella to D&D night, and shit gets awkward real fast because now you're pretending to cast spells in front of a complete stranger, and you just know she's judging you, and that any wrong move can fuck up your buddy's chances with her, so now you gotta hide how much of a freak you are, while simultaneously figuring out how the fuck to be a goblin. Now, is this the worst case scenario when a couple joins your D&D group? Well, in a world that makes sense, yes it would be. But in our world, The View has been on television for a quarter of a century, and Nikocado Avocado hasn't keeled over from a heart attack yet. It doesn't take a genius to figure out that our world is f***ed when it comes to making sense. And boy howdy do I have a story for you today. The story I have for you today stars a match made in hell, as two terrible human beings forge their love for each other in the smoldering remains of their once thriving D&D game. Now, in a way, this is a happy story, because if these two reprobates can find love, then so can you. Now, without any further delay, let's go ahead and dive right into the horrifying world of r/RPG-Horrorstories. Enjoy. This week's story is written by Reddit user Mango Moonflower and is titled A Saga of the Problem Player Couple That Plagued Our Table. Longtime lurker, first-time poster here. Also obligatory I'm on mobile warning for any formatting issues. So this happened a little over a year ago. I've been wanting to post about these two for a while, but I had trouble getting the story to flow in a sensible way. I realized that it was because even though these two players were in a relationship and wreaking havoc on our group at the same time, they were problematic in very different ways. For that reason, instead of trying to tell all the events chronologically, I'll go over the two separately. With that being said, let's meet our cast. Necro, our first problem player. He played an edgy turtle necromancer with a weird fixation on bones. Most of his sins happen out of character. NotTiefling, problem player number 2. Played a changeling bard that had a tiefling appearance and a tiefling backstory. Was basically only a changeling for the lulz. Took the horny bard to a creepy level. Her sins were primarily in character. Everyone else will just be referred to by their class because we had a big party and I want to keep the word soup to a minimum. So for a little context, NotTiefling was a co-worker of one of our group members, the Monk, and approached her at work one day with interest in D&D, as most of Monk's co-workers were already aware that she played. As luck, or misfortune in hindsight would have it, we were about to start up a new campaign with some friends that had just moved into our area. Monk, who was friendly with NotTiefling as a co-worker at the time, invited her and her fiancé Necro to join us with the DM's permission. As previously stated, I am focusing on one problem player at a time, so I'll go ahead and start with Necro as most of his issues were out of character and he was the lesser problem in my opinion. So Necro was the reason that NotTiefling had approached Monk about D&D, since it was through his brother that they were made aware of TTRPGs to begin with. From what he told us, his brother didn't want him joining because they'd cramp his style. After playing with the two of them, my suspicions were that it wasn't the real reason. But his brother's character had also somehow ascended to godhood in Vampire the Masquerade, so who can say for sure? Necro seemed to fancy himself as an intellectual, and for that reason wanted to play a wizard. He chose a turtle for no other reason than their bonkers AC to balance out his squishiness. Now the DM had given us a lore document that listed the common races and mentioned that the exotic races were very rare. We tried to lead him towards a more conventional race, but since the three of us were already planning to play exotic races, we had picked them out prior to the DM giving any solid statements about the setting, we didn't really have any ground to stand on. His issues, for me at least, started months before we even had our session 0. I am one of 3 artists that we have in the group. All of us offered to do art of their characters for them, since it was just nice to have an idea of how the characters look. Now, I have an anime-inspired style that tends to be on the cuter side, as I use a lot of soft lines. Also, I typically draw humanoid characters. He asked me to do his character, and since it wasn't in my usual ballpark, I pointed him to our fighter instead, who has a much sharper style and was really good at monstrous designs. But he buttered me up by complimenting my style, and I eventually said that I would give it a try. I really wish I hadn't. He was the worst type of commissioner. I tried to get detailed information about what he wanted and maybe some reference images, and he, in return, gave me very little to work with. Just vaguely dressed with dead animal parts and some runic symbols. So to make sure he was happy, I sent him progress pictures, i.g. the basic pose sketch, design sketch, color mock-up, etc, etc. And he gave me the go-ahead at every step. Of course, that is until I had completely finished. All of a sudden, he wanted a complete overhaul on the design, even going back on stuff that he specifically requested. I had to start over from scratch. And the way he offered critiques came off as kinda rude, grading elements of the design on scores of 1 to 10. At least he kept the magnum opus of the OG design, a sash fashioned out of vertebra and fishing wire. Now, him being a bad commissioner did put me off, but that didn't mean that he was going to be a bad player, and for the most part, he wasn't. At least, not when he was in character. Despite an edgy backstory and him playing a necromancer in a good-aligned party, he actually played along with the party's desires. He did have some minor main character syndrome, but that was easily worked around. Outside of character, though, he was a different story. He insisted at having session 0 at their place, which was a nightmare for a number of reasons. While the rest of us lived fairly close to each other, they were nearly a 30-minute drive out of the way in the middle of nowhere. He claimed to have a good space for playing, and considering that his older brother hosted his games, we were pretty optimistic. And his brother's space did actually seem nice. Too bad we were instead sequestered to the tiny section of the house dedicated for them. They had a decent-sized table, but most of their seating was uncomfortably low for the height of the table. On top of that, instead of traditional lighting, they also had these color-changing rave lights. They also had a very excitable dog who was all over the rest of us. While the majority of us don't mind a little dog snuggling, this dog was constantly trampling over someone, and his untrimmed nails left some of us with some pretty decent scratches. Necro ended up putting him into another room, but NotTiefling argued for him to be let back out. Now, I didn't know about this until after we'd cut ties with them, but according to other players, he'd said something along the line of, "Do we need to go into the other room and have a talk?" to her because of this. Necro also really didn't like the DM for some reason. If I were to guess though, with DM being one of the smartest people I know, and Necro seeing himself as an intellectual, he might have felt threatened by him. On many occasions, he'd argue against our DM's rulings. One instance, during a non-canon battle royale we played due to a player being out of town, our druid used Ice Knife on a creature that he was next to. He failed his dex save against the Ice Knife's shattering effect and took the appropriate damage. He tried to argue with the DM that it still shouldn't have hit because of his turtle's shell. His turtle also had a thing for bones, and even had a ship made out of bone in his own backstory. His obsession with them really became a problem when he tried to homebrew a spell. And I'll use the DM's own words because he put it best. Guys, he wanted to be able to turn enemies into bone, no save, with a fucking level 2 spell. I asked him to look at other level 2 spells to get an idea of what power they have, and he was just like, "I don't know, man, seems like something I should be able to do already." He also didn't consult the DM when coming up with his character's backstory. In his backstory, an aboleth showed up and destroyed his entire people, leaving only him behind. While aboleths existed in our DM's world because of some fuckery with the plane of water, they lived beyond 100 feet below the surface, and wouldn't have been able to come close enough to the surface to pick off an entire people. He refused to work with our DM to come up with an alternative backstory. So our DM, frustrated, just decided not to put any of his backstory details into the campaign. Less prevalent, but Necro also had his weird habit of parenting NotTiefling. He'd scold her for decisions and use his character to make her behave more suitably, which, when we cover her, will make some sense. But the whole dynamic was just weird. This post ended up being way longer than I expected it to be. Next time I'll cover the real big fish, NotTiefling. You can expect adventures of foot fetish shenanigans and boofing crab shells. If you have any questions or need any clarification about what happened in this part, leave a comment and I'll do my best to answer. See you next time. Quick edit, so I showed this post to my party members, and Monk pointed out that I forgot something crucial. During session 0 at their place, Necro also tried to convince NotTiefling to feed their dog a pot brownie to settle him down. I shouldn't have to explain why that is bad. Aw, come on, don't get the dog involved in this shit. Wait, I'm sorry, but did I just read that we get to look forward to foot fetish shenanigans and boofing crab shells? Cause I just want to make sure I didn't eat my own pot brownie and I'm not high while reading a story. Again. I'm not gonna tell you which one it was, but you're welcome to leave your best guess down in the comments below. But let's not jump the gun here. Now, I want to talk about something that I have a bit of expertise in here. Art and RPGs go together like Joe Rogan and DMT. There's a bit of a dependence. I mean, yeah, sure, you can work with one without the other, but it's not the same, you know? In the D&D community, there is no shortage of people wanting visuals for their characters, or GMs wanting to bring their homebrew creatures and NPCs to life. Online artists have found a pretty solid niche in the RPG community, and for a good reason. I mean, I should know since I've been both the artist and the commissioner, and last I checked, I'm pretty firmly planted in the RPG community. The problem begins to arise when people can't comprehend art as business, on both the artist and commissioner side. It's give and take, and both sides of the deal want a good take. On the artist end, you need to take criticism. Now, this isn't even my normal criticism is what makes you better spiel. This is actually a requirement if you're wanting to sell your artwork. When you sell your art, you forfeit the right to hide behind the old art is subjective line, because it is now 100% objective in the eyes of one person, the client. Your art becomes a product, and if the client isn't happy, well, you don't really have a lot of room to tell them how they're wrong. Is it a terrible feeling to start from scratch when the client changes their mind? Absolutely. Is it necessary? Not if you don't want to get paid. That being said, commissioning an artist for a D&D character isn't exactly like commissioning one to paint a mural or design the interior of your office space. It's a lot more casual. And you gotta remind yourself that 1, no matter their skill level, they're still a human, and 2, it's incredibly unlikely that you're gonna be their only client, and acting like you are is a surefire way to get dropped. Artists talk. And good luck getting an artist to draw your edgy persona when everyone already knows you're a dick. Okay, real quick, side tangent, because I'm just starting to realize how much I despise these intellectual types. I mean, it just oozes arrogance and overcompensation. And I say intellectual in big ol' air quotes, because most of these people are actually pretty dumb. I live by the philosophy that you can learn at least one thing from every person that you meet, and going into conversations with a mindset of, I already know everything, is a top-tier way to ensure that you're gonna stay fucking stupid forever. Anyway, enough about Reddit's user base. Time to dive right into those foot shenanigans and crab boofing. Part 2. Something I failed to mention in part 1, with the exception of Necro's art commission from hell, all these stories take place over the course of only 5 sessions, 6 counting the non-canon battle royale. So with that in mind, let's reintroduce our cast. Necro, our first problem player. He played an edgy total necromancer with a weird fixation on bones. Most of his sins happen out of character. The subject of part 1. NotTiefling. Problem player number 2. Played a changeling bard and had a tiefling appearance and a tiefling backstory. Was basically only a changeling for the lulz. Took the horny bard to a creepy level. Her sins were primarily in character and is the subject of this tale. Everyone else will just be referred to by their class. So DM is the type that likes to tie backstories into the campaign. So he asked for us to write a little bit of background information and give it to him prior to the session 0. While Necro did give DM a backstory that didn't really fit, at least he gave him something. The same could not be said about NotTiefling. She just wouldn't give him anything. It was so bad that he had to set a date for people to submit a backstory to him. She sent it on the day of, and it was maybe 4 sentences long. Based on the writing style and how ignorant she seemed when the DM would bring up stuff from her backstory, we are almost 99% sure that Necro wrote it for her. So, right off the bat, session 0, it was pretty obvious that there was some disconnect with NotTiefling on what the tone we were going for was. We tend to play more serious games, and we thought that we had communicated that pretty well. She wanted to name her character Fart, and seemed very confused when we were not on board with that name. Necro talked her into picking something else. She also didn't seem to realize that there was math in D&D, despite all the math rock jokes that we were dropping in the Discord. So there were 2 primary goals of our session 0. 1. Help the new players with their character sheets. In addition to Necro and NotTiefling, Druid and Rogue were also new. 2. Group up the party. Getting the new players set up took longer than expected, so we were only able to get 3 players to the starting destination by the end of this session. DM requested everyone else meet up with him privately to get them to the same destination, so it wouldn't take up table time. Everyone agreed to this, but when it was NotTiefling's turn, she just continuously ghosted him until time for session 1 had rolled around. Outside of the game, Monk asked her about this. It seemed like when the game was explained to NotTiefling, she fixated on the improvisation part, and thought it was kind of a whose line is it anyways type of game. She seemed to lose a lot of interest after it was explained that it was more of character building and math. Most of us expected her to drop out before session 1. It was understandable, and no one was gonna blame her for not wanting to play after realizing that it wasn't what she thought. Well, she decides to play anyway. DM quickly cooked up the story that she was just kidnapped from her home island, and that's how she ended up on the slave ship that the rest of us were on. The issue starts pretty much right away. So we start. We're all chained up. Necro uses 2 knock spells to get our fighter and monk out. Together they take out the guard with the key, hand it off, and then head up deck to start chipping away at the other captors up there. The key makes its way to Necro, an important NPC captive, and then to NotTiefling. Now, instead of handing the key off to any of the 3 remaining PC captives, she decides to go off with the key and start skinning and looting the dead guard that is below deck. The rest of us are begging for her to unlock us, but of course, she doesn't. The NPC goes for the mace that the dead guard had, so he can help fight the PCs up deck. NotTiefling decides that she wants the mace instead and is gonna fight him about it. Here is where another issue comes up. She hasn't made up her spell list at all. Our ever-gracious and ever-suffering DM allows her to pick spells as we play, with the caveat that they will be locked into her spell list when she picks them. So she basically picks all her spells with tormenting this one NPC in mind. Luckily, she's a bard and doesn't know much about spells, so the worst she does to this NPC is burn him with heat metal. Eventually, I just convince him to give the weapon to her in exchange for the key, with the promise that I'll make him a weapon that he can use when he unlocks me. I played a creation bard. So finally at the end of the session, Druid, Rogue, and I are able to get free. Session 2. Now that the whole party is free, we are finally able to start taking out captives at a faster rate. Meanwhile, NotTiefling is still below deck, harassing the same NPC who is trying to find his old gear. We eventually take over the ship with no help from her. We exchange names and end the session. As a side note, I'd like to add that our problem player number 1, Necro, spent a significant amount of time in this session trying to swim away from the rest of the party for no reason. Session 3. We find an item on board that converts salt water into fresh water, which is pretty crucial since we are in the middle of the sea. Unfortunately, one of the only container options that we have is a magic rope that NotTiefling found that can curl into a bowl. As a result, she is tyrannical about who gets what. The warlock decided to steal some water she doesn't notice, but she still metagames to find out that it was him. Unnecessary PvP ensues. I end up placating her character by having my character offer a token from her home island as payment for the missing water. Session 4. She played remote, so this was one of the only tolerable sessions that she was a part of. Session 5. The real disaster session, which ultimately leads to them getting kicked. The first troubling incident of the night was when she argued with the DM about Necro getting to pick where his character ended up after about a 4-hour downtime period. No matter how much our DM explained character autonomy, she just kept escalating it. Well, if he's below deck, then I'm... Insert location several islands away now. Why was she so peeved about it? Well, she had used Speak with Animals to talk to some orcas that were curious about the ship our characters were on, and promised to feed them Necro's turtle. Druid, who had an herb pouch and a high roll, cooked up some pretty tasty food. Upon getting a whiff of it, several PCs asked her to cook their food for them like normal people. Not NotTiefling though. She decides that Druid needs some buttering up. And by that, I mean she took this opportunity to get off on her IRL foot fetish by getting way too personal with Druid's feet, toe sucking and all. Druid, having a very polite and passive player, tries to just tell her that it's not necessary. Doesn't work. Awkward laughter ensues. She also made a pass at Warlock in a similar toe-sucking manner, but Warlock's player was better at shutting it down. Later, she makes an offhand comment about planning to take my character's virginity to Fighter, who is my character's protector/father figure, which is made especially weird in character because my character looks young for her age as a result of being an ASMR. Combined with Fighter calling her kid, most were under the impression that she was underaged. We mentioned this to NotTiefling. She doesn't care. Time passes again, and she gets a hold of a bucket of multicolored crab shells that came from a fishing vessel our monk worked on prior to the campaign, where the rest of her crew got killed. Monk saw them and was sad and went off to sulk in the captain's hut. NotTiefling wanted to hump the door of the cabin Monk went into, but thankfully our DM stopped it with a, "The captain's hut doesn't have a door." Warlock, seeing how upset Monk was, attempted to get the crab shells as a way to get her to cheer up. Now this is where it really escalates. NotTiefling was insanely stubborn and wouldn't let Warlock have even one of them despite multiple peace offerings from multiple characters. Warlock got fed up and was planning to just try and swipe them from her, but she tried to meta that she had laced them on a steel rope, and when the DM didn't allow it, she took it a step further and said that she would have hidden them up her ass. It was at this point she seemed to realize that, out of character, we were all kind of sick of this situation. NotTiefling, "How many crab shells do I have to swallow to die? Because it seems like everyone just wants my character to die." DM, "You don't have to do that. Your character can be difficult or raunchy, it's just that you're at an 11 right now and I need you to be down more at like a 7. NotTiefling, I just put a lot of myself into this character." DM, "It's just that we like our games to be a little bit more serious, so the types of jokes we have in person don't really work in-game. It doesn't mean we don't like you, we just need to tone you down." NotTiefling, "But this is me toning it down." DM, "And it would be fine if you just played your character as less contrary and attempted less sexual things with fellow PCs without their consent." NotTiefling, "Are you calling me a rapist?" DM, "That's not what I'm saying, Okay, we're just gonna call it here and we'll talk over Discord, NotTiefling." After her and Necro left, the rest of the group had a discussion about their behavior and how we wanted to move forward. We agreed that we would discuss the issues, and depending on how they responded, we would give them 2 sessions to improve. If you read the disclaimer at the beginning of this part and did the math, you'll have a pretty good idea on how they responded to our critiques. Anyways, this part will be too long if I continue on to how we finally rid ourselves of the problematic duo. Don't worry, the next one will be shorter, so hopefully I can get it out soon. See you then. Well, that was foul beyond words. I went over this briefly in a video I did on some furry degeneracy a while back, but it applies to this situation too. ERP and player-driven sex stuff should be a hard no at the table until it has been given the okay by every player at the table. Look, having certain appetites isn't the problem here. It is perfectly natural and healthy to explore yourself. But what is not natural or healthy is molesting the druid's toes. In the simplest way possible, pretend erotic behavior is still erotic behavior. And if you're subjecting your fellow players to your own erotic acts, well, you're just straight up violating their consent. There's no technically here. Every human has the right to say no to participating in your activities, and denying them that by just dropping it in their lap, or at their feet in this case, is downright predatory. The fact that she tries to act like she's the victim here after subjecting these poor players to her own IRL fetishes just makes it even better. The cherry on top is the "I put a lot of myself into this character" line. Yikes. I think that's a pretty good sign to take a step back and take a good long look at the person that you are. For a moment, let's pretend that NotTiefling isn't this degenerate that we know her to be. Her overall combative and standoffish personality is a poison to the table. A lot of her behavior stems from being new and Necro not exactly doing a good job explaining what D&D is all about, but that is not an excuse for throwing tantrums as an adult. Normally I'd say that communication is going to be key to solving this problem, but after all of that, I think I find NotTiefling's idea of swallowing crab shells until the internal bleeding causes her character to keel over and die to be a much more satisfying resolution. Part 3. Hey there, Reddit. Welcome to the final part of the horror story of the problematic couple that we had at our table. This part will be a lot shorter just to wrap up everything nicely in a bow. So when we left last time, the DM was planning to have a conversation with NotTiefling about the dumpster fire that was our last session. Turns out he didn't even need to initiate because she messaged first, somehow still confused about what she was doing wrong and why no one said anything to her directly. Our ever-patient DM listed out the grievances: being contrary, trying to name her character Fart, trying to boof crab shells, the foot stuff, PvP, and not making an effort to learn how her class worked. She mentioned how we had, in fact, addressed the stuff. We just did it in the flow of the game so we didn't have to full stop to coach her about what she was doing wrong at every corner. She said she'd probably just quit and leave us to our game. But our DM gave her until 2 days before our next session to decide for sure. Necro also messaged the DM at the time to tell him that this was weighing heavy on NotTiefling and asking if he was doing anything wrong. To a lot of us, it almost seemed like he was trying to throw her under the bus with the way he phrased it. The DM said that he was mostly fine in character, but the dynamic between him and NotTiefling made things tense sometimes. He also wasn't a fan of how Necro would just be so questioning to his rulings. Necro just didn't respond. So the deadline DM set for NotTiefling rolls around. Now, has she decided to take our critiques and stay in the game? Or has she decided it's not for her and she's going to stop playing with us? Neither! She's decided that we were wrong to say that she was doing bad because it was only that one time, and she's gonna keep going how she was. Great. The DM tried to point out other incidents and explained why they were wrong, but she just kept insisting that it wasn't as bad as we were saying. We were honestly miffed. So we debated for a while whether or not we were gonna give her those chances to shape up, or if we were just gonna have to kick her because she seemed so unreceptive. Monk advocating for letting her have the second chance, mostly because of the co-worker situation. The rest of us were over it though. The fact that she was basically throwing out our concerns was so frustrating, and we couldn't see her improving. We also discussed whether to just kick her out or kick out Necro with her. This was when a lot of the incidents covered in Part 1 came out, so the majority ruled that both of them needed to go. The DM spends the day drafting up a message to kick them. We review it and make sure it's professional, and it lists out all of the grievances so they can't deny them. We wait for Monk to get off work so she doesn't have to be around NotTiefling when the news drops. Then we fired it off. They don't take it well, of course. NotTiefling starts chanting at us to tell it to her face, like a middle schooler trying to initiate a fist fight. Meanwhile, Necro, with his superior intellect, calls our conflict resolution skills subpar and tells us how he'd rather not consort with us. I didn't remember a lot of details after that, but it gets ugly. Monk, Warlock, and I stay on the sidelines while Fighter and the usually passive Druid give them a verbal smackdown, occasionally tagging in DM and Rogue. Once things teetered out, Monk deleted the Discord with those two on it, and we moved to a friend Discord that we had before. NotTiefling does text Monk later, asking why she didn't defend her, and Monk, to keep the work peace, just said she didn't like confrontation. And that's the last we heard of them directly. Through work rumors, we found out that afterwards they got married, and they tried to change their names to absolutely bonkers names, which included religious and scientific terms that they didn't even seem to understand the meaning of. The state naturally rejected the name change. They eventually moved out of our state, which we jokingly like to take credit for. And that is the end of our ordeal with the problem player couple. Luckily, we haven't had trouble with any other player before or since. End of story. DMs, the proper answer to, "I'll just leave you to your game," is, "Okay, bye," not, "You got 2 days to reconsider and come back and abuse more crabs." I'm only half joking here. I know that not all DMs are comfortable making that call, but like I said before, Necro and his r/I am very smart bullshit was already well on his way to becoming a major problem. And that was even before NotTiefling started her rampage. Maybe Necro could have been redeemed with some well-placed communication, but NotTiefling definitely was not gonna pull off that character arc. And you just know that the two of them combined was just gonna implode the whole group in a blaze of toe-sucking glory. Now before we go, let's take a look at this week's Gallery of the Drake. This week's fan art comes from viewer Schifty Animations, and I don't even have any clever skit or anything to go with it. This is just incredible. Huh? Ew, cringe. I love it. Honestly, it brings a tear to my eye knowing that I've finally reached the YouTuber animations phase of my career. It's only a matter of time before I make my first apology video. No, but seriously, to all the animators out there, please keep sending in your animations. This made me feel a genuine emotion for the first time in years. Thank you again, Schifty Animations, for submitting your art. If you'd like to see your fan art featured in Gallery of the Drake, be sure to send it to the email in my About section. Fan art is my favorite part of doing YouTube, and it means the world to me that I can inspire artists like you to create artwork like this. With the story over and artwork displayed, we're gonna go ahead and wrap up. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you feel like supporting the channel further, my Patreon and merchandise links are in the description. I would like to thank you all for listening, and I hope to see you next time in the Den of the Drake.